Hey there, Johnny the Queer POTUS here, and in the wake of the shocking attack on the U.S. Capitol and unprecedented threats against incoming President Joe Biden, January 20th, 2021 is a date which is keeping everyone on edge. But we've been here before. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most perilous inaugurations in history, the first inauguration of Abraham Lincoln. And we'll take a look at some other historical parallels to this crazy time that we're living in. As always, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and don't miss So Long Don, Connor and my official send-off to the 45th President of the United States, Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, live on Twitch. Links in the description below. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's talk about dangerous inaugurations. January 20th, 2021 is a day that's keeping the whole country on edge. The sight of 7-foot-tall, non-scalable fences and thousands of troops is a grim novelty for a country which prides itself on the peaceful transfer of power. Since Election Day, outgoing President Donald Trump has refused to accept the election results. Despite scores of cases being tossed out by the courts and some memorable performances by Trump's legal team, the president refuses to acknowledge Joe Biden's victory. This has only made his diehard supporters even more extreme. On January 6th, while Congress certified the Electoral College results, Trump held a massive rally outside the White House. Flanked by signs reading, "Save our country," Trump urged his supporters to march on the Capitol and stop the count.
Now it is up to Congress to confront this egregious assault on our democracy. And after this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong.
The mob listened. For several hours, Americans watched in horror, wondering if Trump was about to pull off a violent coup. Once upon a time, a mob ransacked its capital city, seized the levers of government, and built a socialist state which lasted over 70 years. The Trump mob did not have the same staying power as the Russian Bolsheviks. By the evening of the same day, Congress reconvened. Vice President Mike Pence, hours earlier hiding from angry ransackers chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," certified the election of Joe Biden as America's 46th president.
Joseph R. Biden, Jr. of the state of Delaware has received 306 votes. Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida has received 232 votes. The chair declares the joint session dissolved.
But MAGA diehards pledged to fight another day. Since January 6th, reports of threats against incoming President Biden have been leaking out to the press. Disturbing warnings from law enforcement have included everything from improvised explosive devices to coordinated active shooter attacks to suicide aircraft. A massive buffer zone has been established around the Capitol building, and 10,000 National Guard troops are being assembled to ensure that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris undergo the swearing-in ceremony without incident. For those of us used to Inauguration Day being a kind of holiday, this is all very jarring. But we've been here before. Although I have to warn you, you aren't going to like this historical parallel very much. The inauguration of our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln, has often been called the most perilous day for American democracy in history. By all accounts, the incoming president was an unassuming, easygoing man who was well-liked by his political rivals, including many future Confederate politicians. Few would have guessed that this man's ascension to the nation's highest office would provoke such an outpouring of hate and ill will. Most had considered Lincoln a long-shot fringe candidate, the nominee of a fledgling new political party known as the Republicans. The Republicans were anti-slavery, opposing the expansion of slavery into the West, which made it anathema for any Southern voter. In fact, in many Southern states, Lincoln's name did not even appear on the ballot. But 1860 was a strange year. The Democratic Party had split between its northern and southern wing and ran two candidates. Another party called the National Union Party ran its own candidate. In the four-way race, Lincoln was able to win the entire North. Although his Electoral College victory was decisive, he only garnered 39% of the popular vote. the least for any president in history. The election results had left many Southerners feeling like Lincoln had not been legitimately elected. On the morning of November 7, 1860, Americans awoke to find that a man they hardly knew, from a party they hardly understood, was to be their next president. Into the information vacuum flooded all manner of misinformation and conspiracies. Newspapers warned of a socialist takeover, with Lincoln redistributing slaveholders' wealth to enslaved African Americans. Plantation owners worried that Abe's election would encourage a liberatory atmosphere and told their slaves that the new president was a cannibal who would devour the entire African race. Even Northern papers got in on the game. The New York Herald warned that Lincoln's election would cause hundreds of thousands of slaves to invade the North, inaugurating an era of, quote, African amalgamation with the fair daughters of the Anglo-Saxon, Celtic, and Teutonic races, end quote. In cities across the country, Lincoln was burned in effigy. Many sent letters promising to kidnap or kill the president-elect. Others threatened to turn the Capitol building into a heap of ashes on Inauguration Day. And in some southern cities, gun-toting militias paraded under the Gadsden flag and its motto, "Don't tread on me." But resistance to Lincoln would consist of more than a disorganized mob and some backwoods militias. By the time Lincoln reached the Capitol to take his oath, 7 states had declared themselves independent of the United States, and an alternate government was set up. In a brief ceremony, Jefferson Davis of Mississippi was sworn in as the first president of the Confederate States of America. Until 1937, the presidential inauguration was held on March 4th, which gave outgoing President Buchanan more than 3 months to sort out the impending secession crisis before Lincoln arrived. To say he did not do so would be an understatement. While the country fell apart, Buchanan wavered between letting the states go and standing for the Union. Southern advisors urged a placating posture, while Northern hardliners begged the president to begin conscripting soldiers to protect the capital. Buchanan's indecisiveness led to a mass exodus in his cabinet. One by one, his secretaries resigned in protest. Secretary of State Lewis Cass, a strong Unionist, left when Buchanan refused to reinforce Union forts in southern states. His Secretary of War, John B. Floyd, was sympathetic to the South and had used his position to funnel money and weapons to the fledgling new government. He resigned as well. Treasury Secretary Howell Cobb ended up becoming a founding member of the Confederacy after he resigned. As a former Speaker of the House, Cobb's portrait was hanging in the Capitol building the day Trump loyalists brought Confederate battle flags into its hallowed halls. Cobb's portrait has since been removed. Buchanan's administration and its divided loyalties managed to lose the support of the entire country, both North and South, and the vacuum of leadership only emboldened the country's most extreme elements. On February 13, 1861, the Congress gathered to certify Lincoln's election, much as it had done on January 6th of this year. And, as was the case this year, on that day, a huge mob gathered intending to interrupt the proceedings. However, unlike this year's ill-fated session, the government of 1861 had prepared for such a contingency. General Winfield Scott, the highest-ranking officer of the U.S. Army, had brought in scores of troops in advance to guard the Capitol building. The mob, which chanted, "Revolution," would get nowhere near as close as the one which ransacked the halls of Congress recently. Meanwhile, inside the Capitol building, the count went on with sporadic objections from Southern congressmen. At one point, Winfield Scott threatened to blow the disruptive Congressman Louis Wigfall to hell. Scores of people filled the galleries of the House and watched in rapt attention. Presiding over the session was Buchanan's vice president, John C. Breckinridge, who also happened to be one of the 3 candidates that had lost to Lincoln in the 1860 election. In a future version of this story, a sitting president would urge his vice president via Twitter to intervene on his behalf and overturn the election results. There was 0 chance of this ever happening in 2021, but in 1861, Vice President Breckinridge was in a position to take such a step. Until 1887, there were very few guidelines as to what the vice president's role was in presiding over the Electoral Count. Let's take a moment and look at why that is. The 12th Amendment to the Constitution lays out the whole process, and it says, "The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and the votes shall be then counted. The person having the greatest number of votes for president shall be the president." According to the amendment, if no winner is found, the election is thrown to the House. If the House can't decide and a president isn't picked by March 4th, the sitting VP takes over as acting president, and the vice president-elect serves as acting vice president. So this year, that would have translated to a Pence-Harris administration, if you can imagine such a thing. The first time a crack in this process was discovered was in 1857, when the results which certified James Buchanan's election were tallied in the House. Due to a massive blizzard, results from the state of Wisconsin had arrived a day late, which spurred one congressman to object to their being counted. Presiding over the session was Senate President pro tempore James Mason. Vice President William R. King had died, and Mason was appointed to fulfill his duties. Uncertain how to react to this extraordinary objection, he told the congressman to sit down. The count went on unabated. But many wondered whether or not a vice president had the power simply to throw out election results they didn't like. These fears were compounded during the election of 1876, when accusations of fraud and voter suppression put Americans through an agonizing 4 months of wondering who the next president would be. 3 states had sent electors for both candidates. Which ones ought they recognize? The Congress decided to form an electoral committee, who ultimately handed the election to Republican Rutherford B. Hayes. In the aftermath of this disastrous election, a comprehensive bill was passed to address some of the electoral problems which had sprung up over the past 100 years of this republic's existence. The act barred the vice president from arbitrarily deciding to reject state votes. In the future, any objections would be debated and voted on in both houses, assuming they were signed by a congressman and a senator.
I object to the electoral votes of my beloved Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Is the objection in writing and signed by a senator?
Yes, Mr. President, it is.
An objection presented in writing and signed by both a representative and a senator complies with the law. The 2 houses will withdraw from joint session. Each house will deliberate separately on the pending objection and report its decision back to the joint session.
Back in 1861, however, this law was not yet on the books. And to his credit, Vice President Breckinridge, who would later go on to serve as a Confederate statesman, certified Lincoln's results without incident. Inauguration Day 1861 was a grim affair. On a cold morning, the president-elect exited the Willard Hotel with President Buchanan and took an open carriage ride to the Capitol. Though 30,000 people had gathered to watch Lincoln take the oath, the procession was brief and without much pomp. Unknown to the crowd, Winfield Scott had placed sharpshooters in the windows of various buildings. Companies of soldiers blocked off cross streets, and a battery of light artillery was stationed on Capitol Hill. Lincoln descended the Capitol steps to tepid applause and proceeded to deliver his inaugural address. Then, at noon, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court Roger B. Taney administered the oath of office. New York Tribune editor Horace Greeley, who sat behind Lincoln, said all were expecting to hear the crack of a rifle at any moment. But in the end, all went off without a hitch, and Lincoln became the 16th President of the United States. In a time of crisis, Americans looked to Inauguration Day as the flashpoint for a coming civil war. But it would be a different day which opened the Pandora's box. On April 12, 1861, Confederate forces made their first attack on a federal fort in South Carolina. In his first inaugural address, the newly sworn-in President Abraham Lincoln had said, "In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war." The South struck its first blow, and a war which would take 3 million lives and liberate 4 million slaves was underway. Now, as we look to Inauguration Day 2021, the same worries grip our nation. No living American has ever seen our capital so heavily guarded, so much like a war zone. We now have more troops here than in Iraq and Afghanistan. In my view, the peaceful transfer of power will take place safely, as it has so many times before. We'll have to rewatch this video in a few days to see if I'm right. But even if nothing goes wrong on Wednesday, it'll be only one crisis averted for a nation gripped by hateful divisions, economic collapse, and a deadly pandemic. What obstacles our new president will face in bringing the country back together remains to be seen. Thanks, everybody, for listening in today. You may have recently heard that I reached a huge milestone on my channel. I am now over 1,000 subscribers, so I'd really like to thank everyone who subscribed to the channel, who supported me all these years, and to let you know that I will be doing a Q&A stream very soon. Right now, if you go to Curious Cat, you can type in a question you'd like to ask me. I left a link to that below, so go ahead and click that link and type out a question that you have. You can ask me about presidents, you can ask me about history, anything you want. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Just go ahead and click that link and check it out. Don't forget to hop on Twitch on Tuesday night at 7 p.m. EST to check out the So Long Don, Goodbye to Donald Trump stream with Connor. And like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and stay safe out there. It's perilous times. Live long and prosper.